My first day of 7th grade. It is still vivid in my memory. It rained steadily that whole day. The remnants of a hurricane were passing through, and we've been following the hurricane in the news. So walking through the hurricane's rain on the way to the school bus made it more real for me. And I was young enough to find it a little exciting to be a part of it. Remember watching things like that happen and kind of being jealous that you weren't in the excitement. That's what I think a lot of kids go through. This was also the day that Leonard Schmidt moved out. It might seem odd that he chose a day of steady rain to move, but since all he took with him were his clothes and his Underwood Standard portable typewriter, the weather probably didn't matter that much to him. The typewriter, I had been told, was just like the one that Hemingway used, and it had belonged to his father, who had died 3 years previously. It meant a lot to Leonard. Leonard left everything else behind that day. His home, his car, his coin collection, his high school yearbook, everything that he and his wife Carrie had accumulated in 22 years of marriage, and most tragically, his 4 kids, who were all under the age of 18 at the time. The rain kind of fit the mood around me. Leonard's departure was an extremely sad day, and something I think a lot of people never expected to see happen. Leonard's family lived behind me, and Leonard's wife and Carrie and my mother, they shared babysitting and borrowed eggs and cups of sugar from each other. Their children were about the same ages as my sisters and I, and so my mother and Carrie would trade kids' clothes back and forth as the kids outgrew things. And Leonard's daughter, Cindy, was like a sister to my sister, closer than a sister in many ways, because they were the same age and they did everything at the same time. First communion, graduations, first dates with boys. They were inseparable. And because they were so close, and because Cindy spent so much time at my house, she was kind of like a sister to me as well. My mother was one of the shoulders that Carrie cried on, and Cindy equally looked to my sister for support. Cindy spent the evening that Leonard left at our house trying to lose herself in my sister's company, making Jiffy Pop, that was the days before microwaves, calling boys on the phone and then hanging up when they answered, and also sneaking out on the porch roof to smoke. Leonard left Carrie for another woman, a divorced secretary in his department who was over 15 years younger than he was. And when the gossip of this workplace affair reached Carrie, Leonard simply left. He didn't explain, he didn't apologize, he didn't attempt any sort of makeup. He just left. Of course, no one in the neighborhood approved of what Leonard did, and his children never forgave him. Having an affair and then simply abandoning his family as soon as he was caught was the start of a 40-year tangle of resentments, disappointments, misunderstandings, and miscommunications that only grew more tangled and more complex as the years went on. Cindy, who had always been close to her father, seemed, to me anyway, to hate him the most. Leonard did try a few times to reach out to her, but all she could see was the man who abandoned his family, and she didn't want any part of him. If he sent her a birthday card, she'd put it inside a larger envelope and mail it back to him unopened. And if he called, she wouldn't come to the phone. So after a year or two of this, Leonard and his family of origin, his mother and his siblings, they stopped reaching out to Cindy and to her siblings. Graduations and weddings and the arrival of babies came and went without them. When Cindy or her siblings did happen to run into Leonard in the grocery store or at the movies, they mutually looked the other way. Leonard's mother eventually died, and Cindy and her brothers and sisters only knew about their grandmother's passing because they saw it in the paper. Carrie, for her part, played the role of wronged ex-wife very well. never remarrying, faithfully playing matriarch to her ever-growing family, becoming heavily involved in the church, and reminding everyone, as often as possible, whenever they would listen, just what a scoundrel Leonard was. She reduced him in everyone's eyes to simply a good-for-nothing loser who drank and abandoned her for a younger woman. And throughout my adolescence, I was in complete and total sympathy with Carrie and Cindy, and I shared in their righteous indignation over what Leonard had done. As I grew into adulthood, though, there were times when I started to wonder how the man that I remembered volunteering to drive all the neighborhood kids to the lake, sitting up all night nursing his daughter's sick cat, and getting teary-eyed the day his daughter made her confirmation, could have possibly in reality been nothing but a skirt-chasing drunk who cared nothing about anything except for his basest proclivities. Could there possibly be another side to the story? The year after I graduated from college, I returned home to save up my money for even more education. And I got a job in a group home for disabled adults. And as it turned out, one of my coworkers was Leonard's second wife, Grace. She was not, by the way, the younger woman that Leonard had left Carrie for. That relationship had not worked out. Grace was actually a bit older than Leonard, and she was also one of the gentlest and most quietly accepting souls I have ever had the pleasure to work with. We worked overnights together when the residents were asleep, so we had lots of time to talk. And slowly, my connection to Leonard and Carrie came out. And as we became better acquainted and more trusting of each other, we slowly and carefully waded into the topic. We didn't do it all at once, but it came out slowly. And every time it would get a little deeper. And slowly, over this time, I finally heard Leonard's side of things, at least as Grace understood. Leonard, according to what Grace told me, had actually been quite unhappy in his marriage to Carrie for quite a long time. He felt unseen to the point of being invisible and unheard to the point where he often questioned his sanity. He felt as if he were drowning in a sea of indifference and that Carrie didn't see him as a whole person with needs or feelings, but simply saw him in the role of her husband and her children's father. Leonard, I found out, also had tried to improve the relationship by first suggesting and then finally begging Carrie to go to a marriage counselor with him. "You're the one with the problem," Carrie had told him. "I don't need a therapist." Only when the situation between them was so strained, in fact strained to the absolute breaking point, did Carrie finally agree to go. "Don't listen to anything he has to say," Carrie said to the therapist in their first session. "He's just having a midlife crisis. I'm hoping that you can talk some sense into him. I'm getting tired of this." Over the next few sessions, Carrie continued to go on this way, trivializing every concern that Leonard raised and getting angry and impatient whenever the therapist asked her to simply listen. Finally, the therapist asked if he could see Leonard alone. "She's never going to hear anything you have to say," the therapist told Leonard. And she went on to tell Leonard that in her professional opinion, Carrie definitely had some narcissistic tendencies. And in her opinion, Carrie would probably never be open to seeing him as anything other than an extension of herself. So for a while, Leonard coped with this news by drinking way too much. And finally, when he met this younger woman at work and things kind of started to develop between them, he fled. And a combination of shame over what he had done and fear of Carrie's formidable anger kept him from demanding to see his children in spite of their anger. And it led him to give up absolutely every possible marital asset that he had in the divorce. And according to Grace, in a further effort to paint Leonard the villain, Carrie refused to accept child support, but then she told the children that Leonard never paid his child support. And the few times over the years that one of the children suggested that perhaps it was time to let bygones be bygones, and had wondered, was it time to reach out finally to their father, Carrie had gone ballistic. Now, hearing Grace's story did fill in a lot of missing pieces for me, and it made me more sympathetic to Leonard. No doubt, Carrie's version of things, however, was slanted in one way, but Grace's version, I'm sure, was kind of, tilted in another. I'm sure that Grace's version kind of glossed over some of the details that didn't fit the narrative as Leonard as this long-suffering spouse. And I'm also pretty sure that if I brought Grace's story back to Carrie would have had a rebuttal. But what did it matter by then? By the time I had spoken to Grace, it was already too late, way too late. Regardless of the reason, Leonard had left his family. He had taken up with a younger woman. He had gone through a period of drinking, and it did appear that he had never looked back. At the same time, I do understand that he had suffered. He hadn't been seen or heard, and he hadn't gotten any credit for all the things that he had done well. And while everyone stayed in their corners, time went on, and life continued to unfold without him. Regardless of the reason, Leonard hadn't been there for graduations. He hadn't walked his daughters down the aisle at their weddings. He had 4 children that he no longer knew, and grandchildren that he had never met. And while it's clear to me that everyone involved in this situation bears some responsibility for how it turned out, it's also equally clear to me, having multiple perspectives on the situation, that this particular case is too tangled to ever really be unraveled. The facts, whatever they may actually be, are layered over with perception and emotion. Misrepresentation and misunderstanding and resentments and regrets all cloud the actual circumstances. Grudges nursed with such relentless regularity that they are all that is left. Stories told so many times to so many people that they stand as testimony. Positions so firmly dug in and so slavishly maintained that they are intractable, and the truth so subjectively nurtured and uniquely interpreted in every solitary heart that objectivity at this point is all but impossible, and common ground is all but gone. It's something we've all seen, and most, if not all of us, have experienced this at some point. And yet, estrangement, especially within families, is an all but taboo topic. We become uncomfortable when we hear about it, and we keep quiet when we experience it. It is seen by most people not as a tragedy, but as a failure. Not as an accident, but a deliberate action. Not as a wound, but as a wickedness. As if estrangement only happened to people who were mean or selfish or especially flawed. As if the cause was always petty and the solution was always simple. As if those involved are merely stubborn and the causes are mostly trivial. We've all heard the platitudes, haven't we? Family comes first. Love conquers all. Swallow your pride. Forgive and forget. Turn the other cheek. As if life never presents us with a conflict that that can't be solved with a saying on a dish towel. As if the people involved in these situations don't long for resolution. As if the narrative could be untangled and agreed upon and put to rest if people just were willing to sit down together. If it were this simple, estrangement would be extremely rare and the reasons would be objective and clear. I think we all know, though, that this is not the case. That estrangement is actually fairly common, and that resolution often eludes even those with the very best of intentions. And we all know that some things really can prove to be just too tangled. That too often, too many misunderstandings, compounded over too much time, can lead people who once loved and needed each other to discrete and separate spheres where they end up living as strangers. If it hasn't happened to us, we all know of a case where it has happened. And we all understand that in spite of what Hollywood may tell us, this is many times where it ends. Sometimes things are just too tangled, and even when reconciliation does happen in some form, it is rarely the fully redemptive gift that erases time, heals all wounds, and absolves all guilt, even though that's what the movies tell us can happen. And sometimes we all know that things are just too tangled for there to be any real resolution at all. Perhaps you came here this morning expecting the message to be, hang in there, be patient, everything can be fixed with love and forgiveness. But I'm not going to say that. Yes, I certainly believe and always will believe that forgiveness and reconciliation are always a possibility. But I don't believe that they are always as probable as we may be led to believe that they are. Nor do I believe that they are as necessary to our happiness and our well-being as many of us believe that they are. Instead, my own life experience has taught me that sometimes things really are too tangled to ever fully resolve. And more importantly, I have learned that we do not always need them to be fixed. How fortunate we are when we understand and are able to accept this, because so often we aren't in control anyway. Those from whom we are estranged have just as much say over what happens as we do, and perhaps they don't want resolution. Perhaps they associate us with pain, and they wish to leave our connection behind them. Perhaps they only want reconciliation with significant strings attached. Or perhaps the way that we fit together with them will not bring either of us joy or peace, but instead will cause further heartache. Sometimes I really believe it is actually better and for the best that we aren't in close connection with certain people, even sometimes family members. In these cases, our separate spheres are refuges, and our estrangement can be a liberating gift. In some cases, we are doing a kindness to everyone involved when we maintain a healthy and respectful distance and let go of our need to be connected. We all need other people. The good news, though, is that I don't believe we need specific or particular people in order to be happy, fulfilled, and loved. In fact, tying our sense of well-being to the presence or the acceptance of particular people can be a recipe for unhappiness, because there are so many ways that we lose connections. Through death, through illness, through physical separation, or through some sort of estrangement. If we can't let go of what we can't have, if we are unable to create new relationships when old ones end, or if we are unwilling to carve out new niches for ourselves when necessary, we are living in a very precarious and vulnerable way. Tying our sense of happiness and well-being to the acceptance and approval of specific people is kind of a form of slavery, if you really think about it. It robs us of our inherent worth and full dignity. It may sometimes require us to compromise our own feelings, our own values, and our own needs. Most of us have had some relationships that have become hopelessly tangled at some point. Even when we perceive ourselves as the wrongdoer in these situations, by the way, we must eventually find a way to move on when things become too tangled, when they cannot be resolved. And if we believe in compassion and forgiveness for others, we must extend those gifts and those beliefs to ourselves. We all, each and every one of us, have a right to love, acceptance, to connection, and to community, even if we sometimes have to look for it in new or unexpected places. Just as Leonard finally found love with Grace, we can all find new love when old love has been lost. We may not necessarily all find romantic love, but we will all find love and connection and community nonetheless. Over the course of the time that I worked with Grace, we discussed Leonard's situation a lot of times as we got more comfortable with each other. And she told me that while he loved his children and he would be there for them if they needed him, he also recognized that he could not untangle this situation. Too much had happened. Too many opportunities had been missed, and too much time had passed. The narrative was too strong. For too long, his children had seen him as the man who abandoned them, and their mother, whatever her flaws may have been, and whatever responsibility she may have borne for the failure of the marriage, she had been there when he had not. He had, Grace told me, made his peace with the situation and accepted that it really was too tangled to unravel, especially because he seems to be the only one who wanted to. He came to understand that he hadn't created the problem alone and that he couldn't fix it on his own either. And the more that time passed, the more his life became filled with new and less tangled connections which sustained him. The good news that I have this morning is that the beloved community is everywhere. It isn't the purview of the perfect, and it isn't tied to particular people. We are all part of it, and we can all access it. We may have to reimagine it sometimes, but if we remain open to its universality, we will always find that there is love to sustain us. We are not banished from the beloved community when we find ourselves estranged from those we once loved. We are merely shifting our place within it. In his retirement, Leonard found a new passion. He began to train guide dogs for the blind. It's a very rewarding experience. I've known a few people that have done it. It's a very rewarding experience, but there is heartbreak built into it as well. These puppies live with the trainer and a very strong bond develops. But after months of putting their hearts and souls into what become their dogs, they have to say goodbye and send them out into the world. Grace once told me that Leonard had said he believed that he found these goodbyes easier because he had to learn for himself the lesson of letting go. Letting go is the hardest part of loving, but it is always the final stage, no matter what the circumstance may be. It's not the love itself that we have to let go of, it's the connection, the physical day-to-day access that we leave behind. The love remains forever, and it merges with the universal unity that is love itself. It moves in and through everyone we touch, even if there are particular people we are no longer able to touch. I will share that my own family has not been spared its share of situations that cannot be untangled. And when I first planned this topic, I had thought that my own particular story would play a much larger role in what I had to say than it has ended up playing. But as I grappled with it, I couldn't figure out a way to tell the story with the proper objectivity and distance, so I'm not going to wade into the specifics. I will simply say that while I remain open to the possibility of resolution, I have learned that my happiness and my sense of well-being is not dependent upon it. The insights that I have shared with you this morning are what sustain me. May they help each of you as we move through a very, very tangled